The Commerce, Justice, Science, Appropriations Subcommittee will come to order. It's a privilege to have with us today the Director of the FBI, Jim Comey. We're delighted to have you today with us, sir. I want to also, before we start, though, take a moment to recognize our newest member, Mr. Palazzo from Mississippi. We're delighted to have you with us, Steve. I know you, under the circumstances, rather not be, but we miss Alan a great deal. But we're glad to have you, and very pleased to have with us Chairman of the full committee. Thank you, Mr. Rogers. Good to have you with us. And Mr. Fatah, we're going to go ahead and crank it up. This is particularly appropriate today to have you with us, Mr. Chairman, because the 9/11 Commission has issued its findings this morning, and we'll talk a little bit about that today. But we're privileged to have you with us here in front of our subcommittee to present your 2016 budget request. It's a very important, complex, and critical mission that the FBI has to perform. We have, on this subcommittee over the years, helped the FBI fulfill its mission. You're the lead agency in domestic anti-terrorism, counterintelligence, national security efforts. It's a vital law enforcement effort, and as you mentioned the other day, I knew this instinctively, but you made the connection with me that once once criminals got a hold of automobiles and could cross state lines, and someone could hold up a bank in 3 different states in the same day, it suddenly made the role of the FBI in fighting crime very, very important to the Congress in the 1920s and 30s. And your role has only grown over the years, and particularly in the light of the 9/11 attacks, the growing danger of cybercrime, the ongoing cyber warfare that's taking place invisibly against the United States and private industry. Your role in fighting human trafficking and financial fraud is just vitally important, and we have responsibility to help make sure that you are able to do your job, but also be sure that our constituents' hard-earned tax dollars are wisely spent. So we want to be sure in the budget request that you submit today on behalf of the FBI and the President that the subcommittee wants to be certain that that we've scrubbed your budget and done everything we can to make certain that again our constituents' hard-earned tax dollars are wisely and prudently spent, particularly in light of the tremendous budget pressures we face in this very difficult budget year. The report that was issued this morning by the 9/11 Commission, we're pleased to see the progress as the FBI has made in transforming itself, as well as in light of the continuing challenges posed by terrorism and other global threats. I want to particularly thank the members of that commission, Ed Meese, former Attorney General, Tim Romer, former Congressman, and Bruce Hoffman with Georgetown University for their superb work. This commission was put together at the instigation of my predecessor, Frank Wolf, and the report is comforting to see the progress that the FBI has made in transforming itself in light of the 9/11 attacks. We'll be working through some tough questions in today's hearing, Mr. Director, and we want to make sure that the investments that we make in the FBI have a real impact in enhancing national security and reducing crime. We deeply appreciate your service to the nation, and I'd like to recognize Mr. Fatah for any comments that he'd like to make.
Let me thank the Chairman and thank the Director for being with us today. You said recently that we have, in every single state, the Bureau has active investigations around terrorism. And obviously, it's a major concern given the activities taking place in all parts of the world. And part of the big discussion in the 9/11 Commission was whether or not how we kind of recalibrated ourselves to deal with these challenges, because heretofore it was about catching people after they've done something wrong. And in the case of terrorism, it's really a much different approach where you're trying to prevent something catastrophic from happening by people who in many instances have no desire to get away. So it's a much different, circumstance. So it'd be interesting as we, talk about, cybercrime, which is a big deal, and, a lot of these other issues. Obviously, this is something that from a national government perspective, the decision of the Commission was that we should not have a kind of a terrorism-only entity, that the FBI was quite capable of dealing with this challenge, and the Bureau has proven to be. But you've also faced criticism from some of the processes that you've had to utilize, which in some cases, you know, the question of whether or not people who are espousing ideas but taking no action, you know, where the line falls. So be interested in your comments. Obviously, your budget and the appropriations, the committee, as it has in the past, will do everything necessary to make sure that you are, have the support needed to protect the country, because you're really not trying to protect the FBI. You're trying to have the FBI protect the nation, and so we have a responsibility to find the resources. But I will be looking forward to your comments on the subjects that I've raised. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Privileged to recognize the chairman of the full committee, Mr. Rogers from Kentucky.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Director, welcome, and to your staff, occasion and your experience in that regard. Pardon my raspy throat. I've caught it. The chairman rightly said that FBI has a critical mission in protecting the homeland. And frankly, the charge of to the FBI has changed absolutely dramatically over the last decade or so. When I first came to Congress in 1981, you know, we were focused on catching armed robbers and all of that. But now it's such a sophisticated and complicated new charge that you have, dealing with counterterrorism, hostile foreign intelligence agencies, espionage, domestic and foreign cyber threats. Cyber is a new word. Now it's a new challenge. And then, of course, the traditional catching of crooks and thieves and dangerous criminals here at home, particularly drug-related, and especially prescription pill attacks that CDC says is a national epidemic. So you have a hefty load, and we're going to try to give you what we can afford to help you fight all of these charges. And it won't be enough. But there's a limit on what we can appropriate. We are confronting an extremely difficult budgetary climate here. In fact, we're debating today on the floor the budget, which is severe and strict. It stays within the sequestered levels. So we're not dealing with a lot of new money, hardly any. It's extremely important for you and others like your agency, which rely so heavily on intelligence information, to leverage and maximize the partnerships forged at the local, state, and even international level to ensure that every penny the taxpayer spends is targeted, efficient, and effective. In fact, last week I visited with the Interpol headquarters over in France, and my second visit with them. And in the last several years, that agency has grown. When I was there the first time, 10 or 15 years ago, the difficulty I saw at that time that our agencies over here were not participating in Interpol as they should. Now they are. And it's imperative that we continue that work with Interpol, as I'm sure you will agree. You've been taking strides in recent years to streamline and optimize your intelligence components, but I think we can all agree that much work is still to be done there. Last year you requested, and we granted permission, to restructure the FBI's intelligence program to more seamlessly integrate intelligence and operations. And I hope you can provide us with an update on those efforts in a minute, particularly as we all begin to assess the report evaluating the FBI's implementation of the 9/11 Commission recommendations. Finally, I want you to provide the committee with some information about how the Bureau is working to combat the threat of homegrown domestic extremism. ISIS has demonstrated very sophisticated recruiting techniques through the internet and social media, and by some accounts as many as 20,000 fighters have traveled from 90 different countries to fight in Syria, including some 150, I understand, from the U.S. that we know about. It's imperative that we work to prevent the radicalization and recruitment of American citizens who could later return to the U.S. and cause us harm. And I know the FBI has an important role to play in that regard. We'd like to hear about it. So, Mr. Director, thank you for your work and your career, and we thank you for your dedication to your country and your service to your country and all that you command. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Comey, I really appreciate, indeed, as the chairman said, appreciate your service to the country. Thank you for being here today, and we will, of course, submit your written testimony in its entirety as a part of the record without objection, and welcome your testimony today, sir. And to the extent you can summarize it, we'd be grateful. And again, look forward to hearing from you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Fattah, Chairman Rogers, members of the committee. I'll be very brief. I want to start by thanking you for your support of the FBI over many years. The FBI's budget request for 2016 is about maintaining the capabilities you have given us, which is mostly people. The magic of the FBI is its folks. 70% of our budget goes to agents and analysts and scientists and surveillance specialists, and my goal for 16 is to be a good steward of the taxpayers' money, because I know the kind of times we face, and sustain that capability. We've asked for 2 small enhancements, one that relates to cyber and the other that relates to our effort to integrate better our systems with the rest of the Intelligence Committee. Each of those is about a $10 million request. But we are about sustaining what you've already given us, and you have supported the FBI in ways that we are extremely grateful for. The threats that we face and are responsible for protecting this great country from are well known to this committee, and you've alluded to them in your remarks. Counterterrorism remains our top priority. The counterterrorism threat has changed dramatically since I was Deputy Attorney General in the Bush administration. They've actually changed in the 18 months I've been on this job. The shift has been the growth of the group that calls itself the Islamic State from a safe haven in Syria and portions of Iraq. They're issuing a siren song to troubled souls to travel to the so-called caliphate to fight in an apocalyptic battle, as they've styled it, or if you can't travel, kill someone where you are. And that siren song increasingly goes out in English. It increasingly goes out on social media and reaches into our country, where it's consumed by people who are very hard for us to see, because they're in their basement, they're in some space that we don't have visibility into, consuming poison, and either deciding whether they want to travel or whether they want to harm somebody here at home. Increasingly, the focus of this threat is on people in uniform. This week we saw ISIL calling for harm to be brought to over 100 members of our military services. And so the threat we face is global. It moves at the speed of light, and it's increasingly difficult for us to see because it goes through the complex spider web of social media. We spend all day, every day, worrying about this and working on it. To answer Mr. Fattah's question, yes, we focus an awful lot on trying to find those needles in our 50-state haystack who might be radicalizing and responding to this poison and either planning to travel or planning to do harm here at home. We have investigations focusing on these people we call homegrown violent extremists in all 50 states. Until about a month ago, it was 49 states, no Alaska. That's changed. We got all 50. And that is no cause for celebration. But we are working with our partners in state and local law enforcement and in the rest of the intelligence community to find these people and disrupt them. Counterintelligence has been mentioned. A lot of folks tend to think the spy game is a thing of the 50s, 60s, or 70s. It's alive and well. That threat comes at us through human beings, through the internet. Nation-state actors are trying to steal what matters to this country, and we are about trying to prevent that. And then you mentioned our criminal responsibilities. We are responsible for protecting children in this country, protecting people from fraudsters, protecting people from the ravages of drug abuse and drug dealing and violent crime. And I've got folks all over this country in 56 field offices and in nearly 400 total offices doing that work every single day. And a word about cyber. Every single one of the threats I mentioned increasingly comes at us through the internet. Mr. Chairman, you mentioned the modern FBI, in a way, was born with the great vector change of the 20th century. The automobile and asphalt made it necessary to respond to a breathtakingly fast criminal element, 50 miles an hour, 60 miles an hour. We now face a vector change that dwarfs that, because Dillinger couldn't do 1,000 robberies in the same day in all 50 states from halfway around the world. That is the threat we face through the internet. It moves at the speed of light. Everybody is next-door neighbors to everybody else on the internet. So we are working very hard to make sure that my criminal investigators, my counterintelligence investigators, my counterterrorism operators, and all of our international operations are growing our ability to be good in cyberspace. Because to protect kids, to fight fraud, to fight everything we're responsible for, we have to operate there. So that's about people, training, technology, and smart deployment. I'll mention one thing that most folks don't know much about. I had a chance to visit our facility down in Alabama. Most people don't realize the FBI trains all the nation's bomb techs. And we do that down at the Redstone Arsenal in Alabama. And we also spend time there building the world's greatest library of improvised explosive devices. Another thing the American people don't realize their hard-earned tax dollars have bought, and it's worth the money. We now have the ability, when a device is detonated or found anywhere in the world, to compare the forensics of that, the tool marks, the hairs, the fingerprints, to thousands of other samples we've collected in the operation called TDAC, which is also centered in Alabama. Work that's kind of hidden from the taxpayers, not intentionally, it just doesn't get a lot of headlines, but makes a big difference. And then I'll close. Chairman Rogers, you mentioned state and local partners. They are essential to everything we do. I've been to all 56 field offices, and I've met with sheriffs and chiefs in all 56 to build those relationships. And I do something else which I think every member of a family, like the law enforcement family, should do. When an officer's killed in the line of duty, I call that sheriff or that chief to express our condolences and offer help. I make way too many calls. I've had 3 officers killed in this country, 2 yesterday, another one earlier this week. Totally different circumstances. Navajo Indian Reservation, Fond du Lac, Wisconsin, and San Jose, California, except united by the fact that they were all murdered by thugs, and they're people who certainly didn't deserve that and leave behind families. I mention this because it leaves me today with a heavy heart, and we're having important conversations in this country, especially about race and policing, which I am a huge fan of having. But I'm keen to make sure that when we have conversations about law enforcement, we understand what's at stake and the sacrifices made by the men and women in law enforcement and the kind of people who sign up to do this sort of work. And especially today with the loss of so much life, just in the last 24 hours, it's on my mind, so I thought I would mention it. But I'll close with thanking you for your support. The 9/11 Review Commission, we told the world today, we released 129 pages of their report. We declassified as much as we possibly could. And their message is, you've done great, it's not good enough. And that is exactly my message for the FBI. I said, that's what it means to be world class, to know you're good and never, never be satisfied with it. So we've made a lot of progress in transforming our intelligence capabilities. We still need to go farther. And the American people deserve us to be even better than we are today. And my pledge is, I've got 8.5 years to go. I will work every day to make us better. So thank you for your time.
Thank you, Director Comey. I think it's especially appropriate you'd mentioned, remind us all to keep your officers in our prayers, and our hearts go out to the families of those 3 agents who lost their lives. And that is something that all of us, I know, keep in the forefront of our mind, the sacrifice, the risk that all of you take in protecting us and the country from these incredibly complex and varied threats. It's also apparent in this new era, the scale of the problem is so huge that you really do have to rely, obviously, on state and local authorities. It is a team effort, and the genius of America is that the founders envisioned a system where protecting lives and property, police powers is vested originally in the states and in the good hearts and common sense of individual Americans. So there's also a vital role, I think, for individual Americans to play in helping defend the country. It's really the most important role, quite frankly, because it's one thing our enemies will never be able to defeat is the good hearts, the good common sense of individual Americans defending their families, their homes, their neighborhoods, their communities. The work that our local police and sheriffs and state police officers do is just indispensable, and that partnership with you is vital, and I appreciate very much you mentioning it to us today. And the evolving threat that we face was important motivation, of course, behind Chairman Wolf's amendment to create the 9/11 Commission, which released its unclassified report today. As I mentioned, former Attorney General Ed Meese, Congressman Tim Romer, and Bruce Hoffman were authors of the report, and I appreciate you mentioning it in your opening testimony. One of the key recommendations they made that I know you've already begun to do and wanted to ask you to elaborate on a little more is the vitally important role that intelligence analysts play in the new world the FBI now confronts. And could you talk a little bit more about the work that you're doing to implement the recommendation of the 9/11 Commission to professionalize the intelligence analyst position within the FBI?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The FBI didn't have an intelligence career service as recently as 13 years ago. And so we have made great progress, but transforming an organization, creating an entirely new element to the organization, I believe is a generational project. Right? And so Bob Mueller spent a decade on it. I announced as soon as I started I was going to spend my decade pushing on that same change, because it's about attracting great talent, training them and equipping them right, but it's also about having the rest of the organization accept them and learn to work well together with them. And we are doing that extremely well in some places, other places not so much. And so what I'm doing is a bunch of different things, but I'm training our leaders on what effective integration between operations and intelligence looks like. I am making it a personal priority so that I monthly review a series of projects to drive that forward. I grade our leaders on it, and I am working very hard to make sure that people understand that this is something the FBI has always done. We've always been in the intelligence business. This is about making us better. It shouldn't be a threat to anyone. It's about making this great organization better. So it is one of my 3 personal priorities at the FBI to make sure that I drive that integration between intelligence analysts and our operators, in particular our special agents, and make it good everywhere in the United States.
And in particular in making the analyst positions, moving them into senior management level, making sure they're integrated with as far as possible into your career service and in senior management positions.
Yes, sir. One of the things I did, again, with the support of this committee when I started, is create a separate intelligence branch. So the leader of the intelligence branch was much closer to me so that I could see that person and drive it. I appointed a very talented special agent to that role, but I said, I love him as a person, don't like him as a concept. Because where the FBI should be, that role should be someone who came up through the Intelligence Career Service, and I've got talent coming up towards that, but I won't know that we've made material progress until the intelligence branch is led by an Intelligence Career Service professional.
Talk to us, if you could also, sir, about the panel's recommendation that the FBI adopt a 5-year plan like the Defense Department, a strategic plan, and your work to implement that recommendation, and do you agree with the concept?
Yeah, that's one I told the commissioners I need to give more thought to. I don't want to create plans just for the sake of creating 5-year plans. I've been in a lot of institutions where people spend a lot of time writing them and then they sit on a shelf. We've got all kinds of plans in the Bureau. What I promise to do is go back and figure out whether there is a missing overarching strategic plan that ought to be written covering a 5-year period. And so I told them I would get back to them on that. I don't know yet whether that makes sense for me.
The Commission also wanted to be sure that we recognized and point out to the public that your information sharing with state and local police departments and law enforcement authorities is a good news story. Talk to us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, that is a very good news story. We have, I think, broken down a lot of the barriers, both technological and regulatory policy, Between us and state and local law enforcement, we share information, but most importantly, the culture has changed. We now lean forward and push things out as a matter of reflex, which is so great to hear. I ask about it everywhere I go in the United States, all 50 states. I say, how are we doing, to the sheriffs and the chiefs? And the answer is, you're doing extremely well. We've seen a dramatic change. And it's the right thing to do, but it's also a very practical reason. We need these folks. Our joint terrorism task forces are made up predominantly of state and local law enforcement that contribute their talent to us. So I do think that's a good news story. But as I've said to folks, look, I have a great marriage, but I believe I can always find a way to be a better spouse. We have a great relationship with state and local law enforcement. I want to continue to try and improve that if we can.
I'm confident that the first time we're going to spot someone who's come here to do us harm from overseas, a terrorist, is going to be an average American using their good judgment and their instincts to spot something peculiar, and or a local police officer or a local sheriff having spotted something that just their instincts as a good law enforcement officer tells them is out of place and wrong. So it is a good story, and frankly the entire 9/11 Commission recommendations, it's very encouraging to see that the sum of what they have sent to Congress in the unclassified version and the classified version is a good news story for the FBI, that you've done a good job in responding to 9/11, and we appreciate that very much, sir. We recognize Mr. Fatah.
Thank you. When I became ranking on this subcommittee, one of my first visits was out to the Center for Missing and Exploited Children, which is one of the places where you do joint operations looking for children. And the Innocence Lost Project, which the committee has supported, you've now been able to rescue some 4,350 children. But as you know, there are thousands and thousands of children who are missing, many of whom are being exploited in all kinds of terrible circumstances. So as you, as the director, you have to prioritize, you know, where you're going to place, you said, your greatest resource are your people, your agents, right? You got, you know, I've also been out to the Joint Terrorism Screening Center. It's very important work going on there. You have to make these decisions about whether somebody's tracking down a child who's being exploited, whether somebody's looking after, you know, chasing down a terrorist and so on. Could you just share with us, as you're working through these issues, how you have prioritized this under your leadership?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fatah. The work involving kids, by the way, is some of the most important meaningful that we do. Right? As the father of 5, I've gone out and visited NCMEC. I've gone and met with all of my folks who do this work and told them there's nothing with deeper moral content than that work, and I want you to take care of yourselves because I worry that it eats my people up. But the way we approach it generally is, this is kind of a homely metaphor, and I was not a football player, but I'm a football fan. I view the FBI like a safety in football. We have certain assigned coverages, right? Counterterrorism, counterintelligence, non-negotiable, every game, every opponent, that's our responsibility. But beyond that, what I want to do is look to the primary line of defense and say, where do you need us in this game? Do you need us in the flats? Do you need us over the middle? Should we play run support? Should we play deep? That's going to be different in every game against every opponent. And so the way the metaphor works is, I've told my special agents in charge is, in the cities in which you operate, figure out where we can make a tackle. Right? I don't want to jump on piles where people have already been tackled. I don't want to be speared in the back, but figure out where we are needed, right? Because we are a big agency, but we're small compared to state and local law enforcement. So figure out where they need us to make a tackle. And that is institutionalized in a process we call threat review and prioritization. It is a very disciplined and very, very complicated process where we figure out what threats in the United States we're needed to make a tackle on. And in Philadelphia, where we needed, in Phoenix, where we needed, in Birmingham, where we needed, and then we come up with an annual list.
Well, you mentioned, you know, that the taxpayer may not know about the explosive bomb detection training you do in Alabama. I don't think most Americans have any idea that thousands of children go missing every week in our country. And some of them end up in circumstances in which they're exploited for years, you know, on the internet and other ways. And so, you know, if you got, and you mentioned that the officer was shot this week and killed in Wisconsin by a suspect in a bank robbery. One of the things you do is you chase bank robbers, right? So some somebody who's a special agent in charge says, you know, we're going to go after bank robbers, or we're going to go after this little girl who's being exploited, and, you know, and making very tough decisions with limited resources. And I'm just trying to understand, because we have to make decisions about what we're funding, you know, how you're making these decisions. And none of them are, you know, I mean, none of them, I guess you would want to do it all, but you got to decide.
Well, the way in which we make a decision is sit down and talk to people like NCMEC, talk to social services agencies, talk to law enforcement, and say, okay, I'm the special agent in charge in Philadelphia. Who is doing what to address that problem here? Given that, where would I rank it on my priorities so that I can press my resources against it according to where it fits on the priority level? We do the same thing at the national level. In Washington, we sit there and say, what are the bad things that could happen in the United States that the FBI might be able to help with? There are 304, not to be depressing, but there are 304 bad things. And then we say, okay, given who else is helping with those bad things and the harm that flows from those bad things, how would we rank them? And then we do that and come up with a national threat ranking of all the threats we could face. It's imperfect, but it's the way in which we try and balance
Right.
it. We do the work you're talking about in every field office.
So the chairman mentioned, the chairman of the full committee mentioned Interpol. You know, Ryan Noble, who's a friend of mine, runs Interpol, and he's been doing a terrific job. And the Europeans have something magical going on because they can make arrests and prosecutions throughout these 28 countries with no extradition, none of these other issues. They kind of have a seamless system that we can't do state to state. I mean, in America, which is interesting, that they've been able to jump over language and sovereignty issues and nationalities to work law enforcement in a much more seamless way. So it's something we can learn, I think, as we go forward. And thank you very much. Thank you, Chairman. All right.
Mr. Fattah. Chairman Rogers.
The biggest change that I've seen in my experience, as far as the FBI is concerned, over the years has been the graduation from investigating already committed crimes and preparing evidence for prosecution. And then there's today's world, where you're working more in preventing, trying to prevent events, including crime, before it takes place. Counterterrorism, trying to prevent terrorism, trying to keep spies away, the constant barrage of cyber threats, foreign and domestic, prevention rather than prosecution, although it may eventually be prosecution. That's a significant change. And it's taken an effort on the part of the FBI leadership over these last few years to try to get it through the agency's head about this new world in which we live, and the mission of the FBI more in prevention, actually, than prosecution. Do you agree with that?
Very much. The transformation that's happened in the FBI is one from a place where we were criticized with some justification for work in our inbox, right? Something that came in or a call that came in, we responded to it and we investigated it, to stepping back and having lots of thoughtful people say, so what are the bad things that are going on here that might happen, and how do we find out more about them so we can address it before it happens? And that's the intelligence transformation. We have always been, I'm the director of the FBI, but I say this with pride, I think we are the best in the world at finding stuff out. What we are getting much better at is being thoughtful about, so what stuff do we need to find out? And who else needs to know the stuff that we found out? And what might we not know? What stuff are we missing? And being much more thoughtful about that. That's taking the intelligence talent and connecting it to the great talent resident in my special agents.
Well, and the current world war, frankly, the terrorism violence is a worldwide event. So we're in a world war. And we're up against a very sophisticated, capable enemy. The recruiting of foreign fighters into Syria and Iraq. We've not found a way yet, in my opinion, to effectively stop or even slow it down. And it's more than a law enforcement, it's more than an FBI mission, but it certainly is an FBI mission. But just last week, we learned about a 47-year-old Air Force veteran who tried to join ISIS. And before his apprehension, Tarod Pugh worked for a number of American firms overseas, and including a U.S. defense firm in Iraq, for whom Pugh performed avionics on U.S. Army aircraft. We've had several stories like that have appeared. Is there a magic bullet to try to get at that kind of problem that FBI can do?
Yeah, there isn't a magic bullet. To us, it's about a full court press, making sure that we are, that we have sources where we need them to be, that we have the capability, both the know-how and the technical capability to play in the online space where they're meeting and recruiting and radicalizing, and that we are closely connected to state and local partners. I agree with the chairman. They are far more likely to hear about a guy thinking about leaving the community and going to Syria, and that we're connected with our intelligence partners and our foreign partners who are tripwires for us. I mean, what happened with that guy is the Egyptians spotted him when he was sent back from Turkey, alerted us, then we're able to lay hands on him.
Let me switch completely to the prescription drug problem, which has been devastating in my part of the state and the country, particularly OxyContin. But now that we're beginning to make a dent in the pill mills, closing them down in Florida and Georgia and other places, and finally getting FDA to change the formulation of drugs like OxyContin to make them non-abused. A lot of the country is shifting to heroin, and the drug cartels in Mexico, I'm hearing, are now getting into the pill business because of the enormous profits there. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think you've identified something that doesn't get the attention it deserves. We see DEA obviously has the lead here, but we do a lot to support them, and so I know a fair bit about this. We see the Mexican traffickers increasingly shifting to heroin. White heroin, used to be that brown heroin was coming out of Mexico. White heroin, highly pure, and pushing it into the United States to gain market share. And so what's happening is, as you said, Mr. Chairman, it's supplanting pill abuse because it's cheaper, easier to get, and it's extraordinarily deadly because the people using it, sounds like an odd thing to say, but don't know how to use heroin, don't realize it's 93, 97% pure, and so kids and adults and people of all walks of life are dying all over this country. And as I travel the country, I see it sweeping south and west. When I became FBI director 18 months ago, I heard about it a lot in the Northeast and sort of the North Central. Now I'm hearing about it everywhere I go for economic reasons. It's cheap, and the traffickers are pushing it in. So we're spending a lot of time trying to work, again, with DEA and our local partners to disrupt the traffickers, to impose costs on them so we can shorten the supply and drive the price up so that we don't have all. I think there were 6,000 deaths from heroin overdose or more in the United States last year, so we can push those number of tragedies down.
Well, still, more people are dying from prescription pill abuse than car wrecks. So even though a part of the country is switching to heroin, it's still, the pills are still a big problem in a good part of the country. Mr. Chairman, I've abused my time.
Not at all.
Quickly, and finally, cyber threats. Where are we?
Cyber is a feature of every threat that the FBI is responsible for. I describe it as an evil layer cake. Right? At the top level, we've got nation-state actors who are looking to break into our corporate systems and our government systems to steal all kinds of information. for their economic advantage or for their intelligence advantage. Then we have organized criminal groups, very sophisticated hackers looking to steal Americans' information for criminal purposes. Then we've got all manner of thugs and criminals and pedophiles down below. And the reason is obvious. Our lives are there. My kids play on the internet. It's where we bank. It's where healthcare is. It's where our critical infrastructure is. So those who would do harm to children or money or credit card information or our banks or critical infrastructure, that's where they come. So there isn't a single cyber threat. It is a feature of everything the FBI is responsible for. And it is, the bad guys have shrunk the world, right? Because Belarus is next door to Birmingham on the internet, and so we're working very hard to shrink it back so I can forward deploy my cyber experts to make the globe smaller so we can impose some costs. Because right now, everybody thinks it's a freebie to steal Americans' information. We have to impose costs on these people, so even though they're in their pajamas halfway around the world, they are afraid to break into an American's life and steal what matters to us.
Do we have absolute evidence, absolute proof that these attacks, many of these attacks are from states,
Yes.
countries,
Yes.
governments,
Yes.
military,
Military or intelligence.
Russia?
Russia is a significant player in cyber intrusions, as is China, obviously. Two huge operators in that world.
We have proof that Russia and China and other governments are attacking our country's cyber information databases.
Yes.
What are we doing about it?
Well, a lot of different things, only some of which I could talk about here. One of the things we're trying to do is name it and shame it. We did it last year by indicting 5 members of the People's Liberation Army and publicizing them on posters who are stealing information from American companies, stealing our ideas and our innovation. And people say, well, indicting them is not going to do any good. You'll never catch them. And I always say, we have many flaws at the FBI because we're humans. We are dogged. And never say never. People like to travel. They like to have their children educated in the United States or Europe. Never say never. We're trying to impose costs. And part of the cost, though, is the naming, the calling it out. The Chinese are stealing our innovation, our ideas, our creativity, our jobs.
In fact, it was this subcommittee, Frank Wolf, the chairman, many years ago, first brought attention to foreign governments hacking into his files, and he sort of led the way. But boy, it's come a long way, and I'm not satisfied at all that we're doing what we need to do to try to stop it or counteract it. Thank you, Mr. Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Chairman, I tell you, it's a top priority for us on this subcommittee, of keen interest to all of us in the Congress, but particular interest to me in the work that you've done. I've had a chance to come out and hear some of their work in a classified setting. It's very impressive. And what advice could you, before we move on, Mr. Hahn, very quickly, just if you could, tell the American public out there listening just some good basic rules to protect themselves, good hygiene practices against cyber attack on their own computers or smartphones at home.
Folks should exercise the prudence wandering around the electronic neighborhood that they would wandering around any other neighborhood. I say, people, I've tried to train my children on this, when they cross a parking lot at night in a shopping mall, they're alert. They're thinking about where they're going, they're walking in a certain way, they lock their car. People should behave the same way on the internet. It's actually a bigger neighborhood, a bigger parking lot.
And more dangerous.
And in some ways more dangerous. And so what I tell folks is very simple. An email is a knock on your front door, right? Opening the attachment to an email is opening your front door. You would never open your front door without looking through your peephole and seeing what's there. But all the time, folks get an email and they open the attachment, and their whole life can be stolen in that moment. And also know where your children are. You know where your children go to play, right? At least I do. And folks need to know, what are their kids doing on the internet? Where are they going? Who are they interacting with? It's the kind of parenting and common sense that we seem to exercise in all aspects of our life, except when we're sitting at a keyboard, which makes no sense at all because we've just made the entire world our neighbors when you're behind that keyboard.
And I heard your wonderful analyst tell us at a hearing in a classified setting we had, Mr. Chairman, with some of your cyber folks, that 80% of protecting yourself against a cyber attack is good hygiene, like washing your hands after a meal or some of the basic things that you have just mentioned to us. Thank you, Director. Mr. Honda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Director Comey, thank you for coming here today to testify before the subcommittee. As you know, a key tool in combating crime is the use of combined DNA index system, or better known as CODIS. And CODIS blends forensic science with computer technology to accurately identify suspects and assist in the successful prosecution of criminals. Last year's budget hearing, I brought up the nationwide backlog of untested sexual assault kits, which was around 500,000. Shortly after that hearing, Alameda County District Attorney Nancy O'Malley and your office began discussions about the backlog that occurs prior to upload of CODIS, and I'm pleased that the FBI laboratory staff have met with the DA several times regarding a pilot project that may facilitate the CODIS upload of DNA profiles linked to suspects of accused sexual assault crimes. And having said that, I just want to add also my thanks to the past chairman, Frank Wolf, who really carried us and helped us see it entirely through. The FY15 CJS appropriation bill included $41 million to address the first point of the backlog in police evidence rooms. And I'm hopeful that we'll continue the program in FY16. And I'm aware that this is outside of your purview, but I wanted you to know that we are committed to this issue. Alameda County and my district has been out in front on this issue, and I encourage you and your staff to continue to work with them on the pilot project that will focus on another point of the backlog, that is the technical review by government labs of a private lab's work before upload to CODIS. I'd like to now turn to how the second point of the backlog can be addressed, namely the implementation of rapid DNA instruments in the police booking stations. And I'm a firm believer that having an arrestee's sample tested quickly by a rapid DNA instrument while that arrestee is still in the booking environment, that will reduce the burden on government labs. And I'm hoping that you will be able to continue. So I raised this issue last year as well. And I know that the FBI is supportive of rapid DNA technology, but since last year's budget hearing, can you tell me about what progress has been made to amend the law, protocols, and policies to allow the use of rapid DNA instruments in police booking stations? And once the relevant requirements have been amended, what is your approximate timeline, assuming that it's been amended, for implementing the rapid DNA instruments in law enforcement agencies, such as police booking stations?
Thank you, Mr. Honda, and thank you for your continued focus on the rape kit backlog. There are rapists out there who will victimize more women, and the key to stopping them sits on the shelves in a whole lot of police departments. And so I appreciate your focus on that, and I promise you will remain focused on it as well. With respect to rapid DNA, you're right, we are big fans of the idea of the capability of being in booking rooms, that a sample can be taken when someone's arrested and uploaded to CODIS immediately. I've talked to my DNA experts. They have continued to work with the companies, there's a private company, enterprise, as you know, making these devices, to give them guidance on what will be needed to make it able to connect to our database in a way that preserves the sterling reputation of our database. My folks tell me there's all kinds of challenges around making sure we have the right software and the right hardware to connect the devices, but good progress is being made. They think that we're probably 2 to 3 years away, though, from being in a place where this is a common feature, even in our biggest cities. I understand it does require legislative authorization. That is, I don't know exactly sitting here today where that sits inside the executive branch. I think with the Office of Management and Budget being looked at for privacy reasons, for privacy issues. But that is, both are marching along at the same time, the technical fix and the legislative fix. That's my understanding today.
Okay, because we have to understand that there's 500,000 kits. 500,000 cases that's being left without the great evidence that DNA will provide. So victims and arrestees are at the bay in order to get their justice. And I think that the quicker we move and be able to implement this, then we can reduce these backlogs and have people really enjoy the benefits of our technology, but also our rapid response to justice. Mr. Chairman, if I may just indulge with one quick question. I just wanted to thank you very much for adding to the FBI training manual, which will include the guidance to assist law enforcement in identifying and reporting hate crimes directed at Sikhs, Arabs, and Hindus. And I think that that's going to be able to, produce a great deal of information. I do have a concern, though, about a comment that you had made last month on race and policing. You said that it's ridiculous that I can't tell you how many people were shot by the police last week, last month, last year. It may be taken out of context, but that was a quote. So as I understand it, currently police departments can, on a voluntary basis, report incidents to the data that the FBI keeps on justifiable homicide. Now, this, however, is problematic. According to one Justice Department statistician who was quoted in a news article, said the FBI's justifiable homicide and estimates from arrested-related deaths both have significant limitations in terms of coverage and reliability that are primarily due to agency participation and measurements issued. Could you discuss what the situation is currently with voluntarily reporting and what approaches we could take to get a better data on this incident to a very high level of public notice?
I agree very much, and it wasn't out of context. I think it is ridiculous that I can't tell you with any confidence how many people were shot by the police in any period of time, yesterday, last week, last year, because we don't have uniform reporting that's universal. Right? Not all police departments, we have 17,000 police departments in the United States. They're not all reporting to us violent encounters with suspects, and so I don't have any confidence in my data. And what I meant was, I think it's ridiculous. I could tell you how many books were sold on Amazon, how many people went to the hospital with the flu last week, but we don't have data. So every conversation about police encounters with citizens is by definition uninformed in this country, and that's a crazy place to be. So what I'm doing is, it is a voluntary system. I mean, it requires the support of local and state law enforcement, and so I'm working with the sheriffs and the chiefs who all agree with me to give us this data. What do you need for us to be able to help you give the data? We're going to be talking to Congress, I think, more down the road about are there incentives Congress could offer to have folks give us the data, but we're not in a good place now, and it's one of the things I'm trying to do after the speech I gave to try and improve the records.
Perhaps through our good chairman that we might be able to look at this and see if we can be of assistance to help the FBI to acquire these information, because voluntary reporting of police shootings, it just doesn't seem to be acceptable, especially in today's environment and the kinds of things that we know, what's going on or what's not going on in our country right now.
We will we'll explore that, and also the level of violence, of course, police officers encounter every day in their difficult and dangerous work on our behalf. Let me recognize the state of Mississippi and our newest member, Mr. Palazzo.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. And before I get into questions, I'd briefly like to express my gratitude and appreciation to the Appropriations Committee and the members of Congress, our conference, for allowing me to serve in the seat our friend and colleague, Alan Nunnally, held. I know everyone who knew him is heartbroken of his passing, and although I do not believe his shoes can be filled, I hope to serve this committee with the best interest of the United States in mind, just as our good friend Alan did for 4 years. With that said, Director Comey, I appreciate you being here and appreciate the sacrifices that your people, the magic in your agency, as you so eloquently said, provides for our security and protection here at home. And I'm sorry for your loss too, as well as the 3 FBI agents you mentioned. We too have lost a U.S. Marshal, Josie Wells, in the past month, and he's from South Mississippi, and it was in the line of duty, and he left a wife and unborn child to carry on his legacy. So we know what y'all sacrifice day in and day out, and some of the best people in the world serve in our law enforcement. I would like to follow up real quick on Chairman Rogers mentioned He brought up China, and China's something from Armed Services and Homeland Security, my former committees, has always piqued my curiosity. They seem to be aggressively building up their military and their space capabilities. And it sounded, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, that we know China, the government of China, is involved in cyber attacks on the American government and American enterprise. And so knowing that, and just indicting 5 individuals to kind of expose them and shame them, I don't think it really works with China, since it has the consent of their government. So with that, how do we counter these cyber? What would you recommend to us on how we counter these cyber threats, both internally and externally? And I guess if we focus on China, or you can an unnamed country if you don't want to pound on them. I'd just like to hear your thoughts.
Thank you. And I should have said, I may have misspoken, that the 3 lives that were lost were of police officers, 1 state trooper and 2 local police officers. As you'll agree, it doesn't make any difference. It's still great people lost in the line of duty. With respect to China or any nation-state actor that's engaged in cyber intrusion activity in the United States, the question about what can be done more broadly about them is one that's both beyond the ken of the FBI, and one that even if it was the FBI's lane, we wouldn't discuss in an open forum. But what we're trying to do is make sure our responsibility is to investigate cyber intrusions to the United States, to make sure that our government has a full understanding of who's doing what, so we can figure out as a country what to do about it. One of the things that we have been involved in is bring criminal charges against some of those actors as part of a toolbox approach to try and change behavior with the Chinese. There are a lot of other things that are beyond the FBI that I know have gone on, diplomatic, for example, and as part of a lot of international forums. Our government, I know, is working to try and adopt some norms and get the Chinese to go along with them. But it is my function at the FBI is to understand what they're doing, develop the facts, and then show our government, here's what we see.
Well, I understand, that the cyber threat is real, and I think Congress and the American people are recognizing that it's real, and it is clear and present danger. I hope we're doing everything that we can as members of Congress to provide your agency as well as others with the resources to counter this threat, because it's not just illegally downloading music, but it's a huge fear that if they engage in some form of cyber attack, that it could cripple our critical infrastructure. And the last thing I'd want to see is the lights go out and your ATM doesn't work, your navigation on your car and your phone. I think it would cause a huge amount of panic in our country. You also mentioned something about the siren song of the radical Islamists. And these people that you mentioned, we don't really see them. They're not, obvious to us in a large extent because they're in their basements consuming this form of poison. Can you, for I guess lack of a better word, profile what this person would be? And is there a certain, something about their demographics that make them vulnerable to this poison? Because I agree with you, it is a poison, and we don't need our young, we don't need anybody in America consuming it.
Yeah. In a way, I wish I could. That's one of the challenges of this threat, is when we talk about travelers, the people that we know who have gone to Syria to hook up with ISIL range from 18 to 62. They're from any part of the country, any background, right? They were either raised in the Islamic faith or are converts who then, but they may have all different kinds of backgrounds, be all different places in the United States, consume this and develop this view that this is how they'll find meaning in life. So they are, the one common characteristic they have, which unfortunately is not a great marker for me finding them, is they are people who are troubled souls seeking meaning in life. But there's not a poverty marker, right? Some of them have jobs. They just have a misguided sense that they need to participate in the apocalyptic battle. Some of them are kind of losers, right, who have had trouble with jobs or petty crimes. But there isn't a particular pattern. We've studied it pretty closely, very closely, and searched for the pattern. But so far, I can't offer you one.
Thank you, Director. I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Following up very briefly on Mr. Palazzo's point about China, a backdoor, a Trojan horse, can be created into a computer system either with a piece of software that you might be able to detect, or it can be hardwired into a computer device, a computer chip, or a piece of telecommunications equipment as a piece of hardware, and it's invisible and you can't see it. And the problem is so bad with Huawei and the Chinese in general, and Huawei in particular, and these Chinese-owned companies, that the Australian government actually just prohibited recently the purchase of any Huawei telecommunications equipment by any governmental entity in Australia. Let me recognize this time Mr. Adderholt and the state of Alabama.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, it's good to be here today and for this hearing. Thank you for mentioning the work we do down in Alabama. We appreciate the what you mentioned, Huntsville and also in Birmingham. I met with the folks, some of the folks from the Birmingham facility just recently, and one of the things that we talked about, they had mentioned to me, was that the new iPhone 6s have an encryption in it that you can't get into they're encrypted and there's no backdoor key. Just wanted to know what, and of course this is different from their predecessors, the other phones were able to get into. What is your, what is the FBI's position on Apple and Google's decision both to encrypt these smartphones?
We have a huge problem where we in law enforcement, state, local, and federal, and in national security work are increasingly, when we have court process, right, judges issue search warrants or interception orders, we are unable to execute on those orders. And because the device is locked or the communications are encrypted. And so we're drifting to a place where a whole lot of people are going to look at us with tears in their eyes and say, what do you mean you can't? Okay? My daughter's missing. You have her phone. What do you mean you can't? Tell me who she was texting with before she disappeared. And I keep saying to folks, as a democracy should never drift. Maybe that's where we want to go, but I think we have to have a conversation in this country about where are we going. I don't want backdoors, right? I want, with court process, the ability to gather evidence after I've shown probable cause to believe on that device is evidence of a crime. The Fourth Amendment is clearly in play, and I follow it and I get authority. We need to discuss if we're going to go to a place where we can't get access. So it's a huge feature. We're discussing it with sheriffs and chiefs, raise it with me everywhere in the country, and say these are important in domestic violence cases, child exploitation cases, car wrecks, and I don't know exactly what the answer is, but it's something we have to talk about.
So, you know, you mentioned about the mother shows you the phone and say you can't get into it. What programs has it affected, and can you just let us know the damage that it's done to the FBI?
Yeah, it's a feature of, we've encountered it in drug cases, all of our work, we've encountered it. I'm not in a position where I can sort of offer a percentage or a number, but it is a feature now, an obstacle in a huge percentage of our criminal investigations. And it will only become worse and worse. I mean, I've heard tech executives say privacy should be the paramount virtue. And when I hear that, I close my eyes and say, try to imagine what that world looks like, right? Where pedophiles can't be seen, kidnappers can't be seen, drug dealers can't be seen. So I don't have a number I can express it as, but I hear it, as you heard it from the folks in Birmingham, I hear it all over the country. We're drifting to a place and not talking about it.
Do you need additional resources to work on this, or what can we as this committee do or as Congress do to try to help you with this?
I think one of the things that the administration is working on right now is what would a legislative response look like that would allow us, again, not in a sneaky way, but with court process, to be able to get access to the evidence. And it's complicated because it involves both communications carriers and device makers. But I think ultimately it's going to require some sort of legislative fix that if you want to do business in this country, we're about the rule of law. But we don't want to create spaces that are beyond the reach of the law in the United States, right? There's no safe deposit box that can't be opened with authority. There's no car trunk that can't be opened with authority. We're getting to a place where there are these huge spaces that are beyond the reach of court authority, and I think it's going to take a legislative fix.
So if I understand you, it's really not a matter of resources. It's really just a legislative fix overall that really this needs to be dealt with.
I think that's right. I think we as a democracy need to figure out, so what are the trade-offs associated with the privacy interests and what are the public safety interests, and how do we reconcile them? It's really, really hard, but it's not splitting the atom. I mean, we do hard stuff, and I just think it's a conversation that we have to have.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Chairman Ederholt asked a great question. Also love for you to talk to us just very briefly about that court case came out of the Supreme Court recently where the phone was seized and part of a routine police arrest, and the police picked up the phone and looked at it, and the guy said you can't look at it. Talk to us a little bit about that case and what, if anything, we could do for example, can't Apple see what's on here under a court order? Couldn't you get it from Apple?
No, the iPhone 6 is designed so that Apple is unable to unlock it. So it becomes the safe deposit box with no second key. I mean, the bank can't get into it, a judge can't order access to it. So it's very, very...
Let me add there, if I understand it, was Apple voluntarily made this decision to fix it so the user is able to lock it and they're not able.
That's correct. And Apple, I mean, I'm not trying to pick on the folks at Apple or Google. Their view is they're responding to competitive pressures. People want to have a zone of privacy, and so do I. But to have a zone of privacy that's outside the reach of the law is very concerning. But, Mr. Chairman, with respect to the court case, the FBI, our practice has always been to get search warrants for devices. That makes good sense to me, especially given that I don't have a phone with me, but all of our lives are there. It's no longer just a phone. It's a suitcase that's carrying your kids' pictures and your documents. And so there was good sense to me in the Supreme Court's reasoning that this is different than it used to be. And so it should have Fourth Amendment implications. And that's the way we treat it. If I want to look at your phone, right, without your consent, I will go to a judge and make a showing of probable cause, get a court order, and if I can get the phone open, then look at it. The challenge, as Mr. Ederholt said, is our inability to access it even with a court order.
Great question.
If I could follow up one more question. Is there been any, have you heard of, there's a rumor that Apple has made an agreement with China about this as a precondition to selling their phones there?
Yeah, I don't know anything about that.
Thank you.
Judge Carter's dealt with this quite a bit as a district court judge, and so I'm proud to
Mr.
recognize
Chairman.
my colleague from Texas, Chairman Carter.
That, you know, there is a way forward, right? So if life or liberty is in jeopardy and my daughter's missing, I want you to get into the phone. If it's a matter that doesn't involve life or liberty, I'm interested in what the founders had to say about right to privacy and the protections of people's personal papers and so on. So, you know what I mean? I think we can find our way forward, and I think that the director's correct, that there may need to be legislative activity that kind of, because the people we represent have some interest in privacy, and which is why these companies are trying to produce a product that gives them that privacy, but we also need to protect public safety. So if there's a terrorist who's got a bomb and you need to track where they are via their cell phone, we want them to be able to do it. So, you know, we have to find the wisdom of Solomon, which is why it's good that the judge is up next.
You're not going to get away from me that way. I'm chairman of Homeland Security Appropriations. I serve on defense and the defense subcommittee, so we have all of the national defense issues with cyber. And now I serve on this wonderful committee, and so cyber is just pounding me from every direction. And every time I hear something pops into my head, because I don't know anything about this stuff. If they can do that to a cell phone, why can't they do that to every computer in the country and nobody can get into it?
The logic
If
of it.
that's the case, isn't that a solution to the invaders from around the world that are trying to get in here? And then if that gets to be the wall, and even the law can't penetrate it, then aren't we creating an instrument is the perfect tool for lawlessness? This is a very interesting conundrum that's developing in the law. If they at their own will, at Microsoft, can put something in a computer, or at Apple, can put something in that computer, which is what it is, to where nobody but that owner can open it, then why can't they put it in the big, giant supercomputers that nobody but that owner can open it, and everything gets locked away secretly, And that sounds like a solution to this great cyber attack problem we've got, but in turn, it allows those who would do harm to have a great tool to do harm where law enforcement can't reach it. This is a problem that's got to be solved. And if you're following the Bill of Rights, you have every right to be able to go before a judge, present your probable cause. If he sees that that's right, get a warrant and get into that machine. And I don't think there's a right of privacy issue in the world that prevents you following the law to do that. And so if that's what they've created a monster that will harm law enforcement, national security, and everything else in this country. And this really needs to be addressed. And I wasn't even going to talk about that, but that upsets the heck out of me, because I don't think that's right.
Judge, if I could ask you about, and Director Comey, you can pitch in, if you had a case in front of you where you had evidence that there was evidence of a crime in a safe that was locked, and only the owner had the combination to the safe, how would you handle that?
If they've got if they bring an affidavit in with probable cause, and I find that they've got probable cause, we're going to give them the right to make the search. And if you've made it search proof, then, and you can't, even the guy that created the monster can't get in there, that's bad policy.
There's no safe like that in the world.
Yeah, you can crack the safe, right? You can just get a court order, you go crack the safe.
That's right.
Mr.
But if you
Chairman,
can't crack the safe,
Right.
which is what they've created here, that's a real crisis.
The analogy seems valid, doesn't it? It's like a safe that's locked up, holding evidence of a crime.
And on our issues of privacy, those issues of privacy are protected by that Bill of Rights.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Mr. Chairman, if
I knew we would find wisdom from the judge.
The question I would ask, and the distinction I would ask to the chair, to the administrator is this, that you get a court order. The court order would be a court order for hard line. You could get a court order for tapping the line. Under FISA, we can now get a court order to tap into information that's used with a digital phone. Accessing information in a digital phone that has what we might want to call our intelligence also. Accessing that would be like accessing a person under oath, any information they may have inside of them. And so we may have to look at the kind of legislation that equates that with our intelligence and trying to access our own privacy. So there would be a sanction if we lie under oath. And if we have a choice now of opening up our own phone, and even the company can't do that, I would just try to make a distinction between.
I didn't yield him my time, but let him talk. He's a nice guy.
Thank you. I'm trying to make a distinction between the kinds of laws that we write or we author in one set of technology. When we're looking at artificial intelligence, and we're looking at another kind of technology where we can make safe our own information, accessing that is going to have another level of thought, like we had to do with accessing and tapping into technology. Safe is still the old technology. I think if you have access to a phone that the individual who bought it can open up, then you can have certain kinds of force of law that would require them to be able to testify.
It's an interesting question. I don't mean to forgive us, Judge. We both.
I just wanted to raise that. Thank you, Judge.
It is a really interesting conversation that Chairman Adderholt started here, and I'm glad to get the judge's wisdom on this.
The other questions I wanted to ask you, last time we were here, you said one of the things you were concerned about is, am I going to be able to get in the workforce the quality of people that I need in this cyber war that we're facing? How are you doing on being able to recruit the intelligent workforce that it takes to go off in this special area of national security and crime? How effective have you been since our last conversation? It's one of the things you expressed the last time you were here, and I wanted to give you a chance to say how effective you've been and what can we do to make you more effective.
Thanks, Judge. Pretty good. but it's too early for me to give you a high-confidence read. I've just been climbing out of my hole from sequestration, so we've been hiring lots and lots of people. So far, so good, and they're staying. Because once you get to do public service, it becomes addictive, even if other companies are throwing a lot of dough at you. So my cyber division attrition rates are very low. Folks are getting in and realizing it's fun to do good for a living. So, but it's early. I don't want to sound overconfident. We should talk again in a year when I have a full, say, 2 years of data on my
Yeah,
side.
and this is not only the issue you've got, but Homeland Security is looking at this issue too. And one of the questions that's come up for us to discuss is what are the opportunities to contract with these people who have these think firms that all they do is this kind of work, and maybe is that something that government can do effectively and safely, protecting government's interests is subcontract some of the work to the great computer wizards of our world. That's something we need to be thinking about. And we're looking at it right now in Homeland Security as whether or not that is a safe and appropriate thing to do to subcontract. So that's something you might think about. Because there's a lot of, I was in a room full of these smart people yesterday morning for breakfast, and I understood about every fifth word. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge.
It's complicated. It's an incredibly complex universe of computer out there. Now, let me recognize the state of Washington, Ms. Aurora Butler.
Thank you, and I have three pieces here, and I'm going to make them as brief as possible. I appreciate your time. I'm going to start on a different track and kind of come back to cyber, because why not mix it up? Actually, this does have a relation. In your submitted testimony, you mentioned the internet-facilitated sexual exploitation of children as an evolving threat that your agency is faced with. And as you know, there are thousands of children every year through sites like Backpage.com and other internet sites that are sold. Backpage and other sites have acknowledged the existence of prostitution and sexual exploitation and of minors on their sites, and these sites are accomplices of basically promoting prostitution and exploitation of minors. I want to know where has the FBI prosecuted any of these companies for knowingly permitting the exploitation of girls and young women on their sites?
It's a great question and a really important question, because you're right. We're seeing an explosion of the abuse of kids through the internet and the selling of kids through the internet. The answer is yes. We have prosecuted the people behind an outfit I think called Red Book that was in California. We locked up the proprietor of it, running it, one of these Backpage.com outfits, and that shut down the site. We may have taken civil action to shut down the site. So yes, we have.
Follow-up, since the online facilitated sexual exploitation of children is an evolving and prioritized threat, help me understand your allocation to that area of investigations, and how does the Internet Crimes Against Children program fund fit into that?
Yeah, we have task forces that focus on this. I'm going to forget the number, but it's more than my number of field offices, so we have 2 in some places. We do this in every field office. We do an operation that I hope you've heard of called Operation Cross Country.
Yes,
We just did the 8th,
Great.
where we work with state and local partners, because it connects to this cyber stuff, because a lot of the ways in which we find that people are looking to exploit kids is through those advertisements, where we try to take down in a swoop a bunch of these people, rescue the kids, and lock up. I hate the word pimp because it almost sounds like some sort of 70s comedy thing. These are slavers. We lock up the slavers and to try and send a powerful message. So I don't know the second part. I'll have to get back to you on the second part of your question, where the Internet Crimes Against Children fund fits in, but I'm sure I can find out quickly.
And I'm glad you mentioned that piece on Operation Cross Country, because I think the demand side, a lot of the work we've been trying to do, even at a state level, is changing the perception. So first of all, we've been much more successful here federally. These are victims. We're talking about young children who have been brought into this slavery, this form of slavery, trafficked and exploited. And what we have now we're turning our eyes to, how do we how do we beat the demand? How are these people prosecuted? There's nothing more frustrating than knowing a 17 or 16-year-old girl who has been prostituted is the one that faces the criminal penalty and a John walks free. It makes me, it is infuriating to me. So your focus on the demand side, both these portals that these criminals are using, and I agree, pimp has almost been romanticized in some areas, which is pathetic. But these Johns, these slavers, need to be the focus. I think you said name and shame. That's another area and a place. I mean, some of the people who are buying these children are people that at times are amongst us. Switching, this is an area where we're going to continue to focus, so we may continue in follow-up with your staff and your team. Cyber, this is my last question. Premera Blue Cross in Washington State had a real serious cyber attack last May, but the company did not discover the breach until January of this year. And then upon the advice of the FBI and a cybersecurity firm, the company waited until March 17th to provide notification of the attack. According to the information we've received to date, about 11 million customers nationwide and about 6 million in Washington State, including my constituents, may have been compromised. So I guess I want to hear, why would the FBI recommend they wait to make that information public when we're talking about names, addresses, telephone numbers, social security numbers, and in some cases medical history, banking data, so on and so forth?
Yeah, thank you for that. I don't know the facts enough to know whether it was January to March at our request, but we do sometimes ask companies, hold off for a little while so we don't alert the bad guys. Because as soon as it becomes public, whoever was doing it goes to ground.
Well, I would assume that's a 24-hour or a 2-day, I mean, the way from some of our previous briefings that we've had with Cybersecurity Division, that's not a 2-month window. Because if it is, we are not doing something right.
Yeah, that's why I don't know about the 2-month window seems odd to me, but it's more than a 24-hour, because often it's a search for the ground zero computer. Mm-hmm. To see if we can find where the digital dust is from where the bad guys entered. And in a huge company, sometimes that takes more than just a 24-hour period. But 2 months I don't fully understand, so I'll get smarter about that one.
I would love a follow-up on that, because that greatly concerns me.
Yep.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you for being here today and sitting here listening to these discussions all over the place. I have an almost 10-year-old and a 6-year-old, and the thought of one of my children going missing and you not being able to do anything about it because of what we already discussed is terrifying. But I can say this, thank you for the work that you do for our country, and I just appreciate the challenges that you have. I'm new to this subcommittee, so I too am not an expert in cybersecurity by any stretch, and it's like going to school every day to learn more about what you do and the challenges that you face. I was in Huntsville. I know you touched on with Mr. Adderholt about Birmingham, and I know you mentioned Huntsville when I wasn't here. But it was great to be at the new TDAC facility, and of course, I mean, they're like delivering furniture. I mean, it was not even completed. There's no bodies there yet, and even some of the equipment. But it's fascinating, and it was fascinating for me to learn about what they're doing. This is the Terrorist Explosive Device Analytical Center, and I also had the chance to stop by the Hazardous Devices School while I was there, which was great as well, where they train local law enforcement. So I guess what I wanted to talk to you about, some of the things that they mentioned as challenge was personnel recruitment, because just nationally it's difficult to find individuals that have the expertise to be able to do this type of analysis on IEDs. And so just wanted to talk about your budget requests and where you see any shortfalls in personnel for this new facility, and how we can make this vital center a reality.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I too visited there within the last 8 weeks. I forget when I was there, and they were just, I could smell the fresh paint. And all.
Right.
Very exciting. because it will make a big difference. It will save lives. That place will literally save lives. The answer is, I think we're doing okay in terms of recruiting and hiring back. We were down many vacancy slots in the FBI as a result of sequestration. We hired about 2,400 people last year. I'm trying to hire 3,000 this year. And then my budget request this year is just simply about being able to sustain that, to hire those folks, then to be able to keep them on the job. I don't think I'm going to have a problem staffing TDAC. I'm going to transfer people. And when I actually went down and met with our staff at Quantico and said, wait till you visit Huntsville. You'll think I don't want to be sent to Huntsville. Wait till I try and get you out of Huntsville in about 2 years.
Right.
So I don't think we're going to have a problem. I think the committee has supported us well enough. And it sounds like a corny thing to say, I'm lucky enough that the FBI has justifiably a very strong identity in American life. And so people want to work for the FBI, and they want to do the kind of work we're doing in Huntsville. So folks are banging down the door. I advertise for special agents, and I get 20,000 applications in 2 weeks. And so I think we're going to be okay there.
And that's great to hear. Talking about the hazardous devices school, I forget what they call it, but the staging areas.
The villages.
The villages, yeah.
We blow stuff up in the villages.
Right, and they're wanting to expand that. Can you just, I mean, it's an expensive school to operate because of what they're doing, and the equipment that they use. So if you could just talk about that a little bit.
There's such a demand for that. Again, that is, as you said, where we, the FBI, train all state and local bomb techs in the United States. There are thousands of bomb technicians in the United States. They're all certified, and they've been trained at the Hazardous Devices School. To be trained effectively, though, you need to work on buildings that have a real feel to them. That's what the villages are. There's a church, there's a little supermarket, things like that you can practice in. So
Well, they also put the church next to the liquor store.
They just showed me the church. They didn't show me the liquor store.
Well, they tried to say it was like Alabama. I wasn't going to accept that, so. Okay,
But we, thanks to the support of this committee and on the Senate side, as Senator Shelby's committee, we've gotten the funding, I forget the number, but to build a number of additional villages, which will really help us. How many additional villages? 6 additional villages. And people shouldn't think that's a whole new town. It's just a little cluster of buildings. That'll enable us to meet the demand. The military, as it's downsizing, is shrinking its commitment to the Hazardous Devices School. And so we're using, again, the support we've gotten from Congress to try to make sure that we staff up to make sure that we have a net, that we stay the same. And I think we're going to be okay there. It was the verdict I got when I was there.
Okay, great. Well, again, thank you for the important work that you do, and everybody that's with you on your team. We appreciate your commitment to our country and our safety. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Roby. I wanted, if I could, to follow up on one of the questions that Chairman Rogers brought up about foreign fighters. Director Comey, we have seen estimates there's many as 20,000 have traveled from 90 different countries to fight in Syria, and we've heard reports there's about 150 Americans who have traveled to Syria and Iraq to fight with ISIS or other terrorist groups. Could you talk to the committee, and this I recognize as an unclassified setting, about your ability to be able to identify and keep track of these folks and the Americans that may be traveling over there, and what can this subcommittee do to help you deal with that threat?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a big feature of our work, and it's enormously challenging. The number of 150 is the approximate number of Americans who have traveled to Syria in connection with the conflict. Some have gone for humanitarian reasons, some have gone to associate with ISIL, some have gone to associate with the al-Nusra Front or other groups. So one of our challenges is, even with those we've identified, trying to understand, so what are they doing there? Because not everybody who's gone there went there to be a terrorist, but we treat them all like they are, and we cover them like a blanket when they come back till we understand it. Our challenge is trying to make sure that with our partners in the intelligence community and our foreign partners, we have the tripwires in place to spot Americans who might be not just going towards that area of the world, but heading towards Syria. This is hard because there are thousands and thousands of Americans every day that fly towards right? The Mediterranean fly towards Turkey for all manner of good reasons. So we need the help of our partners in the intelligence community and our foreign partners to spot those who might be transiting Turkey. And the Turks have been a big help to us there, and that relationship has gotten increasingly good. And then here at home, our challenge, though, to come back to state and local law enforcement is, I'm not highly confident that 150 is 150 of 175. So I'm only missing 25 or 150 of 300. I just don't know. Because, again, it's so difficult in a wonderful free country like ours to know who might be traveling with bad purpose. So that's where it comes into the research we do online to spot them and our relationship with state and local law enforcement.
Well, and also, we have the benefit of having Judge Carter, Chairman of Homeland Security, with us. Talk to us about, and in particular, Judge Carter, how is TSA and Homeland Security doing? How are they working with you and making sure they identify and flag these folks?
Yeah, we've got a great partner.
What recommendations would you make to the Chairman about anything Homeland needs to be doing?
I think we're in a good place, Judge, with respect to CBP. They're our key partner here. They're on our Joint Terrorism Task Forces. They're on our National Joint Terrorism Task Force, because we all recognize that they have the eyes at the border, outbound and inbound. And so we are lashed up with them very, very closely. One of the lessons of the Boston Marathon bombing was we needed to make sure that we were even more effective in working with them. TSA is a great relationship, but the key partner on this traveler bit, it turns out to be CBP, and I don't have a recommendation for improvement on that right now.
Well, but my understanding, Judge, is that, and Director, that the United States doesn't have the ability to track visas. If they overstay their visa, we're not apparently doing a good job, Judge, and correct me if I'm wrong, on tracking these guys. Once they are in the country, we don't know exactly when they...
We don't have an exit policy right now. So if they overstay a visa, they know they can know they're overstaying it, but they don't know if they've left or not. So that's a real problem.
That's why I was asking the question, Director.
But that's not really where he's coming from. Working together, I think there's a good working relationship between the agencies and the FBI and others. Our guys are doing a pretty decent job on the law enforcement side of it. But we need an exit policy, but it's going to cost them, start counting in billions of dollars when we start doing it. And that's one of the problems we've got in this particular environment we're living in right now.
But you can spot them when they leave the country. If you've flagged their visa, if you've got a reason to track somebody, you think they might be a problem, they leave the country, enter the country, Homeland Security is able to share that information.
But we don't have an exit policy right now. We don't know.
But if,
but
if we have an interest in someone, we share that with CBP.
Yeah, then we're tracking
That in their
individuals.
systems, and a flag
Yeah.
goes up.
That's what
Yeah.
I'm wondering.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that's
then if
working
we're
pretty
tracking
well.
individuals, we do that
Sure.
every day.
Yeah.
But just the average Joe that flies over here on a plane for a vacation, if he stays,
Right, or overstays.
we don't know that he didn't leave. He could have left. He didn't. We don't necessarily know
Yeah.
whether he left or didn't leave.
Yeah. We have, I know also the Patriot Act coming up for renewal here at the end of May will expire, and I wanted to, because our constituents are rightly, as Mr. Fattah said, all of us have an interest in protecting the privacy of law-abiding Americans, as I know you do as well, and remembering Benjamin Franklin's admonition that those who would trade a little liberty for a little safety will soon wind up with neither. One of your probably lived in your district at some time in the past, and that's an important lesson for us all to remember. Could you talk to us about, and also the Americans watching today, the protections that the Patriot Act builds into the privacy, making sure that the privacy of law-abiding Americans is protected, and the thresholds that you've got to cross in order to get a court order or access to people's phone records or their conversations, and that suitcase that we all have with us.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yeah,
And how important the Patriot Act is to you.
well, I tell a lot of folks when I talk about this in public, Americans should be skeptical of government power. The country was built by people who were. I tell my British friends it's because of you people that we built it the way we built it, to set interest against interest, because you can't trust people in power. And so I tell folks, look, I'm a nice person, I'm an honest person, you should not trust me.
Texans can relate to that.
Yeah. You should want to know, how is the design of the founders alive in my life? And so the Patriot Act is a great example. Right? If we want to get someone's business records using our authority under Section 215, we have to go to a federal judge and get that authority. and then we have to make a regular report to Congress about how we're using Section 215, and we discuss it in oversight hearings repeatedly. So the executive branch, judicial branch, the legislative, judicial, and executive are working together, and then my work on 215 and all of our Patriot Act authorities is audited by an inspector general on a regular basis who reports to Congress. So that's great. I mean, that's burdensome, but that's the way it should be. And so there are judges, there is oversight in every piece of the work we do. The reason that the Patriot Act authorities matter so much, especially two that I'll mention. Section 215 is the authority that allows us in our national security investigations to go to judges and get authority to get documents or tangible things or records. If that expires and we lose that authority, we will have a gap in our ability to respond to spies and terrorists that I cannot fill with grand jury subpoenas or some other manner of process. That is very, very worrisome. That's a part of the Patriot Act we don't talk about very much. And the second I'll mention is roving wiretaps. In criminal cases, if a drug dealer is swapping phones, as they frequently do, a judge can issue an order that allows us to follow the person so we don't lose him when he switches phones. The Patriot Act gave us that authority when we're fighting spies and terrorists. I think people would want us to have the same authority in spy and terrorism cases that we have in criminal cases. But again, it involves the authority of a judge, right, where we have to make a showing to the judge of probable cause, written affidavits, and overseen by the courts. So I think those are sensible things. The challenge is it just took me 2 minutes to explain it, and often people just sort of nod and say it's terrible what the Patriot Act has done. I hope folks don't do that.
And also important for people to remember, too, that Mr. Snowden is no hero.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit out in an open setting why people should not think of that, what he did, and of him as a hero?
I don't want to say too much because I hope Mr. Snowden will realize that the greatest country in the world has the fullest and freest criminal justice system in the world, and he will avail himself of the rights and opportunities of being able to defend himself in our criminal justice system, and he'll leave Russia and come back here, so I want him to get a fair trial, so I don't want to dump on him too much. I guess what I'd say is those who want to describe someone like that as a hero need to take the corpus of his work and hug the whole thing.
Remember, he carried out, what, how many laptops?
A lot of records. And so you need to take a look at the entire damage to our ability to track terrorists, to track spies. All of the work, the whole corpus of work has to be looked at together.
Exactly. Thank you for the extra time, members. Mr. Fatah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So your budget is inside of a bill. You know, the bill's got a number on it, but the DOJ portion thereof, you know, you're seeking $8 billion. We have another part of this budget that's been growing exponentially. It's moved from $1 billion to $7 billion. It's the federal prison budget. And it's a big concern because the federal prison system is gobbling up this budget that this committee has discretion over. And there's a sense that the country incarcerates people that don't need to be incarcerated. In fact, we incarcerate more people than any other country in the world. And so we set up a commission that's got two former members leading it, J.C. Watts out of Oklahoma and Alan Mollahan out of West Virginia. We put some experts on it, including the head of corrections from the state of Pennsylvania, which I think was a very wise choice. And they are looking at what it is that we might be doing about something that we kind of call justice reinvestment. You know, what can we do to move away from things that are not working, this overemphasis on incarceration, and to move in some other direction. And there's some states, Texas has been at the very forefront, actually, of looking at some very aggressive activities, particularly in terms of the juvenile system and in not incarcerating so many young people. So I'd be very interested in your view about who the country, you know, somebody said here, I can't remember who, you know, people who've done something we don't like, we shouldn't put in jail. The people we fear and it could do us harm, we should put in jail. And I'd be interested, as the lead law enforcement official in the country, what your view is about this problem and what we should do about it.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Fatah. It's something I've spent a lot of my life thinking about, and I'm still not sure I'm expert enough to be useful to you, but here's my take on it. I think we can always be smarter about how we incarcerate, how we use the coercive aspects of the criminal justice system. I also think we can be a whole lot better at preparing people to re-enter society. That's something I think we as a country have done a very poor job of. But I also want to make sure that if I'm involved in an effort like that, that I'm thoughtful about what connection, if any, is there between the incarceration rate and the fact that we have historic low levels of crime. I wouldn't want to do anything, and I'm not saying people are, but we wouldn't want to do anything where we say 20 years from now, geez, we really got that one wrong, because we had achieved a level of reduction that was unprecedented. So I'd want to be thoughtful about that. A lot of people smarter than I should think about that. And the second thing is I want to be data-driven. I'd want to know, so who are the people who are in jail, in federal prison, and why are they there, and what are the risks associated with them? Because the reason I say that is, oftentimes I hear people talk about the low-level nonviolent drug offenders in federal prison. I've never put anyone there by that description. And I can't find a whole lot of federal prosecutors who say, yeah, I prosecute a low-level nonviolent drug offender. And so there may be a lot of folks like that, but I'd want to make sure that the data is scrubbed. But other than that, I'm agnostic. I'm not an ideological person. I want to be effective.
Well, this is almost an equal part of our budget to what your request is now. And at one point, it was, at $1 billion. So, and the number of inmates actually has, as the crime rate nationwide has been, the number of inmates have been going down, the crime rate's going down. A lot of that actually is happening at the state level, though, not necessarily where we are. But let me move on to a different subject. But the committee would be interested in your thoughts as we go through this process and as the recommendations from the Coulson group comes back. I'm sure the chairman would be interested in your thoughts. So Sandy Hook took place a little while ago, but it was a tragedy. And there are, every year, not just the loss of police officers, there are literally, thousands and thousands of Americans just being shot and killed. And the access to firearms, which the Supreme Court has said people have a constitutional right to, and that's the law of our land. As a law enforcement official, how do you, and Todd Jones is now leaving as the head of the one of your sister agencies. What's your thought about what we should be doing and thinking about as a nation vis-a-vis the question of firearms?
Another big, hard question. Probably all aspects of that are beyond my expertise and my authority, except for one piece. I've spent a lot of my life as a prosecutor trying to make sure that criminals were deathly afraid of getting caught with a gun, right? And that if a criminal is caught, obviously committing a crime with a gun, or just possessing it, there are severe, severe consequences. I've long believed that most homicides are happenstance homicides. Right? What would otherwise be a fist fight or a rock fight becomes a shootout because the gun is an article of clothing. Right? It's there in the waistband, the felon has it there, or the drug dealer has it there. And that if we can make the criminals are very good at rational calculation, fear that as an article of clothing, then we'll have more fist fights, more rock fights, maybe more stabbings, we'll have fewer shootings. So we did in Richmond, Virginia, an effort to really try and drive into the criminal mind that you should be afraid to even think about you should think more about your gun than about your socks and your shoes when you get dressed to go out and deal drugs or hang on a street corner. And I think that's very, very effective. And so I am a big supporter, not a big part of the FBI's work, of maniacal enforcement of felon in possession, drug dealer in possession, crimes like that, because there's no excuse for a criminal to have one, none.
And one last question, Mr. Chairman. There's been a lot of debate here on the Hill about prosecution of people you've locked up as terrorists in Article 3 courts. As best as I can tell, there's been no incidents, there have been no issues. These prosecutions have proceeded during the normal course, and justice has been served. Is that your sense of this? Is there some, because we have this debate, the administration wants to close Guantanamo and get out of the business of incarcerating people without a trial, and with, just incarcerating without having any due process, because they think it's a problem for our country internationally. Is there any concern you have about the ability of our court systems to handle these cases?
But distinguishing, I know, as Mr. Fatah would, between foreign nationals captured on a battlefield overseas versus an American citizen.
Well, as I understand your question, it's just about the effectiveness of the criminal justice system in my experience.
Yeah, I'm not trying to get
I'd
you in the
like to
middle of this.
avoid-
I'm just trying to
avoid
make
the
sure that
harder
you,
conversation.
whether or not there should be any concern from our standpoint as a country that our court system is capable
No,
of
none.
prosecuting.
None. Now, that doesn't
terrorists
mean
in our
that,
Article
that
3
doesn't mean
courts.
that ends the policy conversation, which is one the FBI shouldn't be involved in, but yeah, my experience, our courts are very, very good at offering people a fair trial and then incapacitating them for the rest of their lives in a safe way.
Thank you. Thank you.
Expertly done. I want to be sure to recognize Mr. Palazzo. Mr. Honda.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me just say, I appreciate your flexibility and the judge's flexibility, too. I just have a real quick question. In 2016, my area will be hosting the Super Bowl, and in the past 3-4 years probably, we've been tracking the Super Bowl activities in terms of human trafficking. And in that light, you have the arena of transnational organized crime, which addresses trafficking of women and children internationally. You also have a discussion around the child sex tourism initiative and addressing child, instead of saying prostitution, I just say child sex slavery, because prostitution has another connotation in my mind. Is there staff that we can collaborate with and speak with to anticipate the 2016? We're already working on cyber systems with our local entities in terms of light rail, high-speed rail, and those kinds of activities in airports. It would be great if we can work with some of your staff to check and double-check the kinds of things that we're doing and to see if there's anything else that we can do and collaborate.
Yeah, and I'm
one
sure that we can, Mr. Honda. This is something we have a lot of expertise and
Yes.
practice in, all aspects of the threats around a Super Bowl, but we do, we can equip you with that. We do a lot of work around Super Bowl events. In fact, I would tell people, come to the Super Bowl for all kinds of good reasons. If you're coming to try and pick up kids or engage in prostitution involving children, we will be there, and we'll be looking to lock you up. So
Yes,
we'll
and-
get you what you need on that.
And we'd like to look at public education and engaging the other agencies to be aware and trained on visual kinds of surveillance too. So be greatly appreciated. Thank you,
Sure.
Mr. Chairman.
Judge Carter.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's have a little judge-prosecutor discussion here.
I'm too right.
We can also, law professor, I'm not a law professor, but this is the kind of thing we're going to have to be thinking about. We're telling our industry, okay, the cyber attacks are real, they're coming, Home Depot got attacked, Sony got attacked, just heard about Blue Cross getting attacked. You got to build your fort. We're part of our plan for cybersecurity is to tell industry, build a fort, protect yourself, be prepared. We're helping you, assisting you, but be prepared. Now, whether this attack is a criminal act or an act of war is an interesting debate to have. I've asked everybody in the cyber field, what's your opinion of when a cyber attack escalates above a criminal activity and becomes an attack, an act of war? Most people say it's a policy decision. I understand that's a good cop-out. But just a discussion, it's an interesting discussion. But then there's even more interesting thing, because what you're going to have ultimately is almost, we're going back to the Middle Ages. We're building a bunch of little forts around our industry. Some of these forts are going to be very powerful. I would bet the fort around Microsoft is going to be extremely powerful. The fort around Apple is going to be extremely powerful. Not only powerful in defending themselves from an attack outside, but they will actually have the ability to counterattack. And when they counterattack, they could start an international incident, they could start, we don't know what, and that's a question we have to ponder, because quite honestly, we are, as a government, promoting them to build that fort. And that fort's nothing more than build your own castle and protect your castle. There are some that are going to be always able to be in the defensive posture. But those with the offensive capability may go offensive. And from a criminal justice system, then we have to decide, has that person gone too far? Just like the security guard that uses his gun in the protection of the bank or so forth. Some of it's going to be self-defense, maybe some of it's not. We have to make that determination. We may have to make that determination in the cyber world at some time in the future if a private entity protecting its own property decides to counterattack in a cyber attack, which we certainly have the ability to do, at least we presume we do as a government, then you have to presume some of these big monster tech industries have the ability to counterattack. How is that going to affect us in the world of criminal justice, or have you ever thought about that?
Well, I've thought about it. From private sector, where I was before coming back to this great job, and on the government side, the answer is we as a country can't allow it. Right? It's against the law, and my view is it should remain against the law. It's great to build a fort, but if you start throwing rocks off the parapet or throwing barrels of oil down, it can have knock-on effects that are very, very hard to predict and could drag us into a place we don't want to be. So it is unlawful for a private entity to hack back, and it makes good sense to me. But I also agree that there's a crying need from a lot of private enterprise for our government then to fill that space, and that is a harder policy question. But we can't have each of these castles start throwing stuff out into the square. That public space is a place where the government ought to be operating.
And I would agree to you, but if you look at the Dark Ages, that's exactly what happened. The France couldn't control the individual castles. England couldn't control the individual castles. It caused all kinds of social turmoil in the Middle Ages, and arguably we could be going to the cyber Middle Ages of everybody defending their own, because the government is pretty much saying right now, we're taking care of the government, and in some instances we're taking care of our body politic of commerce. But the individual person with the ownership has got to protect their own. And I think that on the horizon we've got real issues, because the government's got to come in and say, how far can this person go to protect their own?
Right.
If they develop an ability, for instance, and I'm making this up because I don't know anything about cyber, that the minute you hack into me, it fries everything, every community you're attached to all over the world. If somebody comes up with that, that's going to be a very large offensive tool that somebody could use. It's a question that the government's got to start thinking about, because this is a big deal. And at some point, that's an act of war. Then the government has to go to defend the individual's property. If they bombed Microsoft or bombed the ExxonMobil building in Dallas, I think we'd be, with a flyover airplane, dropped a bomb, we'd call it an act of war. The question is, will we get to the point where it's an act of war by basically destroying that business? That's a tough question.
Yes, it is.
And we in the criminal justice system have to think about it, and our professors back in law school have to think about it. We have to come up with a solution.
Well, as a criminal justice analog, right, in the Old West, if the marshal doesn't provide safety for the folks living in those communities, in those towns, well, then they're going to defend themselves to protect their families from the bad guys. So the government has to fill that public space and defend the citizens.
I think you're probably right, and that's a huge task. Thank you.
And a great question and a good analogy. If the government is unable to defend that public space and provide protection, if the marshal can't be there for the little homestead outside of town, out in Indian country, how we've got, all of us, a right of self-defense. To what extent does an individual or a business have the right of self-defense, for example, in the cyber world? There's no clear answer, I guess.
Hard question.
It is a really interesting question.
It's a question that I think we're literally creating those castles today. No doubt about that.
And,
Time for our local
sure.
banks, protect your own resources.
And to follow up a little bit on the analogy earlier, the conversation about the Apple 6, in the case of a safe where you've got a court order to go in and get the contents of a safe that you have probable cause to believe contains evidence of a crime, if the safe is uncrackable and either the owner cannot or will not open it, is a general rule, does the company that built the safe have the ability to open the safe? Is there any requirement with a physical safe that they be the company that built the safe open it? Do you have the ability to open it? Is there any legal requirement? How did that work, Judge and Director, in your
I don't know
experience?
about legal requirement. We could, with a court order, we could almost always get information from the manufacturer, or we just blow the door off.
Just- But the manufacturer could tell you.
I've got to go. I want to thank you for what you do. We're very proud of the FBI and all the good work you do. Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. That is absolutely true, and I won't keep you too much longer, but you could either blow the safe, or in your experience, the manufacturer always had the ability to open it
Yeah.
in some way, shape, or form.
What I'm hesitating is, I don't know whether I've ever seen a circumstance we use lawful process to compel a manufacturer to give us assistance. I just don't know enough.
Just drill it or blow it.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Because that's another problem we're going to have to, again, protecting people's individual privacy, but recognizing if you've got evidence of a crime locked up in that suitcase, how in the world do you get at it? Let me ask about, before we wrap up, and I'll follow up with other questions for the record, the importance of information sharing with the Inspector General. It's a question that's ongoing with every agency under our jurisdiction. The Inspector Generals have a vital role in notifying us of that they do audits, and if the Inspector General is ever denied access to information, they have to notify the committee, and we've gotten several notices from the Inspector General. I know we've mentioned this to you and your folks before about the FBI's failure to comply with the access to information requirement, and I know that the FBI has disagreement on what the law requires. And Mr. Fatah and I have both written a letter to the Attorney General asking the Office of Legal Counsel to help resolve a particular matter, I think involving whistleblowers, to resolve this matter as quickly as possible. I'd just like to ask you, sir, what steps are you taking to ensure the Inspector General gets the information they need in a timely manner? And what, if any, conflict of interest may there be in the agency being investigated by the Inspector General being in a position to decide what information the Inspector General needs, particularly since the Inspector General has, as you did as a prosecutor, the ability to review things in a confidential manner and in camera, so to speak, as a judge would. Since the Inspector General has criminal investigative authority and can maintain the confidentiality of that information, shouldn't the IG be the one, or you be able to work with them in a confidential, behind closed door manner to decide what information they need? What are you doing to help them get what they need in this case, for example, in particular?
No, thank you. It's an important issue. I love my IG. As he knows, the only thing I clearly love more is the rule of law. And so I'm in a situation where the FBI, Office of General Counsel, has given us legal advice over several general counsels about what the Wiretap Act and the Grand Jury Secrecy Act provides with respect to our ability to give information to the Inspector General. And so we just have to solve that problem, which should be fairly easy. As you know, the Office of Legal Counsel is looking at the question. I think the new Deputy Attorney General is moving towards resolving this question. I just need someone at a high level in the Department of Justice to say, it's okay, you don't have to go to a judge before you can turn over wiretap information or grand jury information to the IG, and problem solved. But I have no interest in obstructing the IG.
I know that.
But I also don't want to be us just willy-nilly turning over stuff that might be protected under these statutes, and have someone say, well, how'd you do that? You were told by your general counsel that the law required this. So I just need clarity there. And the other thing I'm doing in the meantime is just trying to speed up our business processes.
Yes, sir.
So that we just do whatever we think we have to do under the law much more quickly.
What I'm particularly interested in is getting it done in a timely fashion. What are you doing to help expedite the process so the Inspector General can get the information that they need to do their job?
Yeah, I think that is literally a question of building better business processes to quickly review and copy and produce and search for information. I won't go into all the boring details, but I have an internal consultant shop that are geniuses at business process. I've put them to work on that, saying, figure out how to do this faster. It's like making cars. Just figure out how we can do that much more effectively. I think he will see dramatic improvement there. That's not going to solve this legal question, but I think I can solve the business process. Then if I can get the leadership of the Department of Justice to solve the legal question, then it'll all be, I want to all be love, I suppose, with the IG, but it'll be in a much better place.
Mr. Honda? I also, on behalf of the subcommittee, the people of Texas that I'm proud to represent, want to express our deep gratitude to you and for your service, and to the men and women of the FBI for all that you do to help keep us safe while protecting our privacy and our very precious constitutional rights as law-abiding Americans. We're your best backup. There's no better backup for a law enforcement officer than a American using their own common sense, their own good judgment, their good hearts. And by the way, you mentioned earlier about criminals with guns. I doubt you've ever had a problem with a concealed carry permit holder who is licensed with a background check, using their good judgment. I'm not aware of any problems with Texans that are licensed. Could you comment on that as a law enforcement officer and a
I
prosecutor?
haven't had situations where there's been problems with that.
With a concealed carry permit holder.
No, not that I can remember.
That's a law enforcement officer's best backup, particularly if he's a Texan. Thank you very much, sir, for your service to the country, and we'll submit any further questions for the record, and the hearing is adjourned. Thank you.
Right. Hey, right?
Yeah, that is true. Yeah.
Hey, John, thank you.
You bet.